Brainsourcing is a novel technique that unifies the fields of crowdsourcing and brain-computer interfacing. It allows people to collaborate on recognition tasks using only their brain signals evoked in response to a given information stimulus. Brainsourcing builds upon the concept of crowdsourcing, but instead of manual labor, it relies on contributions of individual people by implicitly monitoring their brain activity while they encounter information-intensive tasks. Crowdsourcing, more generally, is a paradigm in which ideas, data products, and intellectual work are produced by a large group of individuals, unbounded by time or space. In crowdsourcing, tasks are divided among individuals to achieve a collective result. Crowdsourcing is a broad field, and tasks can be roughly divided into two categories: macro work and micro work. Macro work often requires special skills and quite a bit of time to complete. Examples of macro work include open-source software development and editing Wikipedia articles. Micro work does not require specialized training or skills, and most tasks can be completed in a short amount of time. Featurizing images and transcribing scanned text, as with Google's reCAPTCHA service, are examples of micro work. For our experiment, we focus on micro work in the form of recognition tasks, where users look for images matching a certain description. Brain-computer interfacing is an interaction paradigm driven by real-time neural activity collected from a user. This brain activity can be recorded using a variety of methods. One of the most popular, and the one used in this experiment, is electroencephalography, also known as EEG. EEG is a technique to record electrical activity of the brain, typically done by measuring changes in voltage at the surface of the scalp. This electrical activity is related to neural processes occurring in the brain. EEG data has a high temporal resolution. However, its spatial resolution is quite poor. So while EEG data can be used with a high degree of accuracy to detect when a neural event has occurred, it cannot be as easily used to determine where it occurred. Event-related potentials, commonly referred to as ERPs, are a key feature of EEG data. ERPs are time-locked voltage fluctuations produced by the brain in response to some event, such as viewing a face or moving a muscle. ERPs consist of positive and negative components, characterized by a variety of amplitudes and latencies. To automatically interpret ERPs, machine learning models can be trained to distinguish between ERPs produced by different events. In fact, brain-computer interfaces that use EEG often follow an ERP-based approach to facilitate user interaction, such as with BCI spelling programs. Statistical techniques are then used to distinguish between the types of responses. In this experiment, we make use of the P300, an ERP component associated with attention and memory. Let's say we have a test subject who will let us record some EEG. We ask the subject to look for faces of smiling people, and then show them faces of people smiling, target class, and not smiling, non-target class. Now, the ERPs produced by smiling faces are distinguishable from the ERPs produced by faces that were not smiling. This is indicated by the larger positive peak visible at around 300 milliseconds post-stimulus, the P300. Stimuli of the target class, that is, with the feature of interest, will produce ERPs that contain a P300 component. Stimuli not containing a feature of interest, part of the class non-target, will typically produce ERPs without a noticeable P300. This effect is reliable enough where we can train a classifier such that, given an ERP, we can determine the class of stimuli that produced it with a reasonable level of accuracy. Brainsourcing takes this classification approach a step further. The classification accuracy of a single brain-based model, while better than random, is still not high enough to compete with more conventional approaches. Rather than simply relying upon the brain responses of a single individual to determine classes of stimuli, it's possible to combine predictions derived from many individuals' brains. Using this approach, brain sourcing achieves results that are significantly better than any individual model. We will now provide a brief overview of how the brain sourcing pipeline is constructed. Full details can be found within the paper. First, we need a brain sourcing worker. Okay. The worker is placed in front of a computer screen and fitted with an EEG cap and electrodes. They are then asked to complete a recognition task where they look for faces that match a certain description, such as having dark hair or a smile. The worker does not need to provide any explicit feedback. They simply sit back and observe as faces are presented to them on screen while their scalp voltages are recorded. In practice, it looks something like this. After collecting enough training data from the worker, a classifier model is trained using the ERPs produced by each stimulus. When a worker is then presented with a new stimulus, the ERP it produces is fed into the classifier model, which uses features present in the ERP to determine the class of the stimulus. But remember, we're conducting brain sourcing here, so we need to repeat this procedure for multiple individuals. By training models for other brain sourcing workers and combining many predictions for the same stimulus, we can classify images with higher accuracy than any individual model. To ensure the brain sourcing model performs better than individual models, the results are analyzed in 3 ways. First, by showing that the brain responses are reliable. Second, by measuring the performance of correctly classified tasks. Third, by investigating the changes in what the classifier learns when a crowd is used instead of individuals. To show the brain responses are reliable, we can plot the ERPs produced by the 2 classes of stimuli across all tasks and visually compare them. As we can see, there is a distinct difference between ERPs produced by target and non-target images, and this difference is present for all tasks. To measure the performance of correctly classified tasks, we compare classification results as data from more participants are used in the brain sourcing estimations. In this case, we take a representative sample of blonde faces and dark-haired faces for task blonde, and visualize whether these stimuli were correctly classified by the brain sourcing model using their associated ERPs. As the data from a greater number of participants is used in the brain sourcing model, performance improves and the number of misclassified stimuli appears to decrease. Analyzing this more empirically across a larger sample size using F1 score, we find the same phenomenon holds true. Further analysis of the brain-sourced estimations reveals a clear bimodal distribution as data from more participants are added to the models. This reflects the nature of the stimuli data and further suggests that the brain sourcing model is indeed learning something meaningful. In this research, we showed that human brain responses can be effectively utilized in a crowdsourcing setting. Combining predictions from just 2 participants already yields an F1 score of 0.77 across all tasks. Combining predictions from 12 participants achieves an F1 score of 0.94 across all tasks. This performance is high enough that it could be used in real-world situations. Due to the sensitive nature of brain-based data, it's important to recognize potential ethical and privacy issues that may arise from brain sourcing. Widespread adoption of brain-computer interfaces is not yet a reality. However, with continued improvements to existing technologies, it could be in the near future. When brain-computer interfaces are as common as the mouse, keyboard, or touchscreen, anyone could become a brain sourcing worker. This may lead to unethical labor or revenue models, like replacing conventional advertisements with brain-sourced microtasks. EEG data can serve as a biometric identifier. Brain-sourcing data that is improperly handled could reveal the identity of a worker. Meanwhile, governments, corporations, and criminal organizations might use these systems in ways that violate an individual's right to privacy and autonomy. New forms of malware could also emerge, where brain-computer interfaces are hacked to conduct subliminal probing for private information. With widespread adoption of ethical design practices and privacy-preserving techniques within the brain-computer interfacing community, we may be able to reduce the risks associated with this technology.